This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon. Shalom Aleichem. Bruchim Habaim. We continue in Orchos Chaim of the Holy Rosh. We're up to Ois Ayin Zayin. Yesterday we learned, do not stop contemplating Chachma and Musar and roll in the dust of the feet of the sages and you will become wise. Says the Rosh, Al Taniach Derech Chasidus, do not forsake the path of Chasidus, Afal Pisha Maligan Alecha, even if people mock you, Ve'al Tevoish L'dvar Mitzvah, do not be ashamed when it comes to a matter of a mitzvah. So the Orchos Chaim is saying, don't forsake the path of Chasidus even though they mock you. The question though is, and we discussed this earlier, is that in Ois Nun Hey, the Rosh said, Al tasa davar she'aligu abrios, do not do something that people will make fun of. So it's a little bit of a stira. Here he says, do not forsake the path of Khasis even though they mock you. And there earlier he said, don't do something that people will mock you. So you could answer simply that earlier he's not talking about a dvar mitzvah, he's talking about a matter of reshus, he's talking about something that maybe is not completely obligatory, and here he's talking about something which is a mitzvah. And we discussed this at length earlier. Rabbi Cheskel Sarna in his Iyunim says there it's talking about it's strange to people and therefore they're unknowingly, unwittingly, without any evil intent going to mock it. That you have to be careful about. But here we're talking about where they're shaming you b'mezid. So if they're shaming you b'mezid, you should not pay attention. The Targum of the Tosfos Yom Tov has a different approach. He says, if you already started doing a mezuzah de Chasidus, and this is your practice, don't stop it just because people are mocking you. Don't be embarrassed from doing any mitzvah that you've already been doing because they're mocking you. That implies, l'chatchila, don't do something that's going to cause people to mock you, but once you've already done it, don't stop it just because people are mocking it. And then the Rosh adds, do not be embarrassed from a dvar mitzvah, meaning, not only should you do the mitzvah despite the fact that people are shaming you, but when you do it, do not feel any shame. Don't be embarrassed, because it's actually an insult to the mitzvah if you're embarrassed by doing the mitzvah. You're putting down the mitzvah if you're putting down the mitzvah if somehow you're putting down the mitzvah if you feel shame by doing the mitzvah. Was it muted the whole time? Yeah? Okay. So again, the Rosh is saying, do not forsake the path of Chasidus even though they are mocking you, and do not be embarrassed from doing a mitzvah. Here the Rosh is adding a further point, that not only should you not forsake the mitzvah because they're embarrassing you, but moreover, you should not even feel embarrassment. Reb Goldberg cites the halacha in Orach Chaim in Siman Reish Nun that you should wake up early on Friday to prepare for Shabbos, even though you have many avodim to be meshamesh you, because this is all covered for Shabbos. And the Bir Halacha explains that this answers the question of the Chavos Yair. Chavos Yair asks, how could the Chachamim deal with their kavod lightly? But we know kavod abrios is great, that it pushes away a loisase in the Torah. So how could they, so to speak, get down and mop the floors for Shabbos? But what about kavod abrios? We know that if a zakein passes by an aveda and it's not lefi kavodah, so he should not pick it up. He should not engage in it. So then, what's the reason? Why do we say that? Why do we say that it's worthwhile for Talmid Chacham to lower himself to prepare for Shabbos? So the Be'er Halacha says that over there, by Shabbos, it's clear you're doing it for the kavod of Hashem, and therefore it's not considered a lack of kavod habriyos. In the case of the zaken, by Naveda, where the honor of the Talmid Chacham is becoming lessened, he should not do it. Now, in the Sefer Beis Kelm, on the Haftarah Parshas Lech Lecha, he brings down a medrash in Bereshis Rabbah. The king of Persia sent a gift to Rabbi. He sent him a precious stone. And he said, Rabbi, you send me something. So Rabbi sent a mezuzah. Because he said, you sent me a stone I have to watch. I'll send you a mezuzah, the mezuzah watches you. And in Kelm they would say, what exactly is this medrash teaching? What's the kavanah of Rebbe? Certainly the king of Paras did not appreciate mitzvos, so why did he send him a mezuzah? However, in Kelm they would say, if you have a spirit of seichel, you will see wondrously that Rebbe is teaching me that certainly Rebbe had what to send the king of Persia. He was a wealthy man. But he sent him a mezuzah to show how Torah is so chashav and precious in his eyes. And he's showing his backbone, that he's not embarrassed to show the king of Persia that to me, what's valuable is an item of a mitzvah, not money and not wealth. Let's do one more ice. Do not close your hands from constantly giving the poor and the avyonim. But do not ignore your own relatives. Now, what's the Rosh saying? Always give to the poor, but don't ignore your own relatives. He's saying, even though you're chayiv always to give to the poor, to any ani that asks, but your relative has kedima. And if by giving too much to the poor you won't be able to give to your own relatives, you have to give your own relative precedence. And it could be, says Rav Goldberg, that by stam aniyim you only give if they ask you. Meaning, don't close your hand from giving to the aniyim who ask, but when it comes to a relative, if you see that they need, then you can't ignore them even if they don't ask. It's interesting, in terms of the obligation to give to one's relative and to bring close your own relatives, this is one of the midos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Hashem is mekarev kroivim, like we find in Tomer Devorah, l'she'iris nachalasai. In the Gemara in Sanhedrin Darshans, one who loves his neighbors, one who brings his relatives close, one who marries the daughter of his sister, one will be zoicha as tikra v'Hashem ya'aneh. They once asked Rabbi Akiva Eiger once said as follows. He said, even though when it comes to Rabbi Akiva Eiger said, when it comes to a relative, there's never an excuse to ignore them, because it says mebesarcha loy tisalim, do not ignore your relative, because by an aveda it says v'hisalamta, sometimes you could ignore, but by a relative can never be ignored. And they once they said a story. Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Rav Meshulam David Soloveitchik, who said over that Baruch Chaim Oizer was once meeting with an assembly of Gedolei Torah, and he heard that one of his relatives had come, so he stopped what he was doing to welcome this relative. And they asked Rav Chaim Oizer, you're leaving all these Gedolei Torah to receive your relative? And he said, in the Torah, by the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, it says, sometimes you could ignore. But when it comes to mishpacha, like Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, it says al tasalim, never ignore a relative. There's never a heter of v'his alamta. Okay, Rabbi Say, we'll continue Bez Hashem next week, Monday. Ois Ayin Tes, wishing you all a wonderful day. Bracha v'hatzlacha.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.